Leave now, or they'll find you. The voice was small, almost swallowed by the wind, but it stopped Nathaniel Price cold halfway down the museum steps. For a man worth billions, a man who moved through Manhattan inside glass towers, black sedans, and rooms where people never dared raise their voices, it was not fear that made him pause. It was precision. The little girl had not asked for money. She had not tugged at his sleeve like the tourists and charity workers who sometimes crowded the edge of these gala nights. She had spoken like someone delivering a message she could not afford to get wrong. Nathaniel turned slowly, the December air cutting sharp against his face. She stood 3 steps below him, no more than 9 years old, maybe 10 at most, wrapped in an oversized brown coat that had seen too many winters. The cuffs swallowed her hands. Her sneakers were damp, the canvas darkened by slush, and one lace had come loose and dragged against the stone. But her eyes did not belong to a child asking for help. They were steady, alert, too clear. The gold light spilling from the museum doors touched one side of her face, while the rest stayed in shadow. And for one strange second, she looked less like a kid and more like a warning that had somehow learned to breathe. Behind Nathaniel, laughter drifted from the charity gala he had just left. Crystal glasses chimed. A violin quartet still played somewhere inside the marble lobby. Out on Fifth Avenue, headlights dragged white lines across wet pavement, and the row of black SUVs waiting at the curb reflected the city like polished armor. His chief of security, Marcus Doyle, noticed the pause instantly and took one step forward. "Sir." Nathaniel lifted a hand without looking back. His gaze stayed on the girl. "What did you say?" he asked. She moved closer, just enough for him to hear her over the traffic. "Leave now," she repeated, voice thin from the cold but unshaking. "Not in your car. Not with them watching." Nathaniel frowned. Them. People used vague words when they were bluffing. They hid inside shadows and pronouns because details exposed lies. But the girl did not look like she was bluffing. She looked like she had run on pure nerves and stubbornness to reach this exact patch of stone before. He disappeared behind tinted glass. Marcus came down one step, broad shoulders blocking part of the wind. "Hey, sweetheart, you need to move along." The girl flinched at his voice, but did not back away. She kept staring at Nathaniel. "Please," she said. "You only have a few minutes." That was when irritation should have taken over. Nathaniel Price did not rearrange his schedule because a child in a borrowed coat spoke in riddles. He had investors waiting on a call from London, a private dinner in Tribeca, and a life organized down to the quarter hour. But something in her face held him there. It was not panic. Panic would have been easier to dismiss. This was something colder. Urgency sharpened by certainty. "Who are you?" he asked. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "Zora. Last name." A beat passed. "Bennett." The name meant nothing. At least not yet. Nathaniel glanced toward the curb. 4 black SUVs. 2 drivers. 3 security men near the barricade. A line of donors still filtering down the steps behind him. Nothing out of place. Nothing except the girl. And who exactly is going to find me, Zora Bennett? For the first time, her eyes flicked past him, toward the street. Not long. Just enough to chill him. When she looked back, her voice dropped lower. "The men by the delivery gate. They know you kept the photo." Nathaniel's expression changed before he could stop it. Small. Barely there. But it happened. Marcus noticed. So did she. The wind swept harder across the avenue, rustling the black ribbon pinned to Nathaniel's lapel from the memorial tribute inside the gala. The photo. No one was supposed to know about that. Not the framed magazine covers in his office. Not the polished board members. Not even half the people who had worked for him 20 years. It was a photograph from another life, from before the private schools and market takeovers and magazine profiles, from when he and his younger brother still smiled the same smile. Nathaniel felt something old and unwelcome tighten in his chest. "What photo?" he said too evenly. Zora did not answer right away. Instead, she reached into the deep pocket of her coat with fingers stiff from cold and pulled out a folded piece of paper so worn at the edges it looked like it had lived in fear. She held it out. Marcus moved first, taking it, checking it, then handing it to Nathaniel. It was half of a burned photograph. The missing edge had curled black. But what remained was enough. 2 boys in summer shirts. A lake behind them. And the outline of a woman whose face had been nearly eaten by flame. Nathaniel stared so long the city seemed to dim around him. He knew that picture. Knew the dock, the sky, the cheap disposable camera that had taken it. He had not seen it in 15 years. "Where did you get this?" he asked quietly. Zora's lips parted, then closed again as if she had to choose between fear and truth in real time. "From my mother," she said. "And if you don't leave right now, they're going to take it back." Nathaniel did not realize he had stopped breathing until Marcus touched his elbow and quietly asked if they should move inside. The museum steps, the waiting cars, the bright wash of camera flashes from the far end of the barricade all seemed to pull back at once, as if the city itself had taken one careful step away from that burned photograph in his hand. He looked from the paper to the girl again. Zora Bennett stood perfectly still, but her shoulders were trembling now, not from fear alone, but from the cold that had been working its way through her thin coat for who knew how long. She could not have weighed more than 60 pounds. A strand of dark hair had come loose and clung to her cheek in the damp night air. She wiped it away impatiently, like she had no time for small discomforts. "Your mother gave you this?" Nathaniel asked. Zora nodded once. "She told me if anything happened, I had to find you before they found me." Marcus shifted beside him, voice low and controlled. "Sir, this is not the place." He was right. Too much glass. Too much light. Too many eyes pretending not to watch. Nathaniel folded the photograph carefully, more gently than he had touched anything all evening, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. "Which men?" he asked. Zora did not point. She did not turn her head. She only looked past his shoulder toward the side street, where the museum loading dock opened into a service lane lined with gray steel doors and stacked crates from the event vendors. "One has a silver ring with a black stone," she said. "The other one keeps checking his watch, even though he is not waiting for anyone. They are acting like they are not together, but they are." Nathaniel felt a strange chill travel up the back of his neck. Details. Clean, observant, immediate details. Not the kind a child invented on the spot. Marcus touched the wire hidden at his collar and murmured instructions so softly they vanished beneath the passing traffic. Nathaniel watched two members of his security team peel away from the curb and drift casually toward the side street, without breaking formation. Inside the museum, laughter rose again, warm and distant, from people still wrapped in wine, speeches, and polished charity. Out here, the cold had teeth. "How long have you been waiting for me?" he asked. Zora pressed her lips together before answering. "Since before 7. Nathaniel glanced at his watch. It was now 9:15. More than 2 hours in the December cold. "Did you come here alone?" She hesitated just long enough to tell him that the truth mattered. "Yes." "From where?" "Queens." The word landed harder than it should have. Queens. Alone. At night. In weather that made grown men rush between heated lobbies and waiting cars. Something in Nathaniel's chest tightened again, but this time it was not the photograph. It was the simple fact that this little girl had crossed the city by herself because no one else had come. Marcus received a faint response in his earpiece, and his jaw set almost imperceptibly. "Sir," he said, keeping his voice neutral, "there are 2 men at the service lane. One is wearing a silver ring." Nathaniel did not react outwardly, but Zora saw the confirmation in his face. "I told you," she whispered. There was no triumph in it, only exhaustion. He looked at her properly then, not as a disruption, not as a mystery, but as a child who had carried too much by herself for too long. "Why did your mother send you to me?" he asked. Zora looked down at the wet stone between them. For the first time since he had turned around, she seemed her age. 9 years old. Tired. Hungry. Trying very hard not to shake. When she spoke, her voice came out smaller. "Because," she said, "you were the only man who would understand why the picture mattered." A taxi hissed through a puddle at the curb. Somewhere down the block, a horn blared and then faded. Nathaniel's world had once been built on understanding patterns before anyone else could see them. Markets, motives, leverage, weakness. But this felt older than business. Older than strategy. He reached up and loosened the scarf at his neck, then bent slightly and draped it over Zora's shoulders before she could protest. The dark wool nearly swallowed her. She blinked in surprise. "Keep it on," he said. "You are freezing." Marcus gave him a look that asked the question aloud without words. "What now?" Nathaniel already knew the answer. He did not trust the sidewalk. He did not trust the line of waiting cars. He did not trust the neat choreography of the night he had planned an hour ago. Most of all, he did not trust coincidence. Not when a girl from Queens appeared with a burned photograph from 15 years ago and a message timed to the minute. He opened the rear door of the second SUV instead of his usual one and stepped aside. "You are coming with me," he said. Zora looked at the vehicle, then back at him, uncertainty flickering across her face. "How do I know I can trust you?" Nathaniel held her gaze for a long second, hearing the question for what it was. "Not disrespect. Survival." "You do not," he said quietly. "But if your mother sent you to find me, then she already made that choice. And I think she had a reason." Zora studied him for one breath, then another. Finally, she climbed into the car, clutching the coat closed with both hands. Nathaniel followed. Marcus shut the door, and as the SUV pulled away from the museum without headlights for the first few seconds, Nathaniel looked through the tinted glass toward the service lane and saw two men step out from the shadows half a beat too late. The inside of the SUV was warm enough to make the cold on Zora's skin suddenly hurt. It crept back into her fingers and cheeks in tiny sharp waves, the kind that came when a body had been holding itself together on pure will and was finally forced to admit it was tired. Nathaniel noticed the way she kept her hands tucked beneath his scarf, fingers hidden, shoulders still tight, as if she expected the heat to disappear at any moment. The city moved past the tinted windows in long streaks of gold and white, traffic lights blurring on wet glass, storefronts shining against the black December night. For the first 30 seconds, no one spoke. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat, one hand near his earpiece, the other resting lightly against his knee, watching the side mirror as though the mirror might confess something before the night was over. Nathaniel sat across from Zora in the rear-facing seat, his coat still buttoned, the folded photograph pressing against his chest from the inside pocket like an old memory refusing to stay buried. "Where are we going?" Zora asked at last. Her voice sounded smaller inside the quiet luxury of the car. Nathaniel looked toward Marcus. "Not home," he said. "Not the office. Somewhere private." Marcus nodded once. "The townhouse on 71st is clear." Nathaniel agreed without hesitation. It was not the place he used most often, which was exactly why it made sense. He turned back to Zora. "You will be safe there for tonight." She lowered her eyes to the thick carpet under her shoes, then back to him. "Only for tonight." Nathaniel heard the question beneath the question. "Safe for tonight." Safe from who? Safe until what? He did not answer immediately because false comfort was still false, even in a soft voice. "For as long as we need," he said instead. Zora studied him, measuring the weight of the words. Then she gave the smallest nod. Outside, the SUV turned downtown, tires humming over slick pavement. Nathaniel reached for the small built-in compartment between the seats and pulled out a bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich left from an earlier meeting. He held both out. "When did you last eat?" Zora looked at the food first, then at him, as if accepting kindness required its own kind of courage. "This afternoon," she said. "What time?" "After school." Nathaniel glanced at his watch again. "9:30. She took the sandwich with both hands and unwrapped it slowly, careful not to drop crumbs on the seat, careful in the way children often became when they had learned too early that being small made adults notice messes before pain. She ate without rushing, but with the focused silence of someone who had spent too much energy to pretend she was not hungry. Nathaniel looked away for a moment, toward the window, and found his own reflection staring back at him in the dark glass. He was suddenly aware of how absurd the contrast was. Hand-stitched wool coat, museum gala, a chauffeured armored vehicle, and across from him, a 9-year-old girl from Queens eating a leftover sandwich like it was the first stable thing she had touched all day. "Tell me about your mother," he said quietly. Zora swallowed before answering. "Her name is Marisol Bennett." Nathaniel's expression did not change right away, but Marcus heard the shift in the silence and half turned from the front seat. Marisol Bennett. The name reached through Nathaniel like a draft through an old house. He had not heard it spoken aloud in over a decade, yet it still carried shape and weight. Marisol had once worked in legal compliance for Price Strategic Holdings back when the company was smaller, hungrier, less polished. Sharp mind, precise memory. The kind of woman who could make a room full of expensive men nervous with nothing more than a folder and a calm voice. Then one day she was gone. No public explanation. No farewell. Just gone. Nathaniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "How old are you, Zora?" 9. He did the math without meaning to. 9. Too young to understand most of what had just happened. Old enough to understand enough. And your mother told you to find me herself? Zora shook her head. Not exactly. She told me a long time ago that if she ever stopped coming home, I should find a man named Nathaniel Price and show him the picture. The sandwich paused halfway to her mouth. I did not know if you were real. Something in Nathaniel's chest gave way just slightly. Not enough to break. Enough to ache. When did she stop coming home? Zora's eyes dropped to the wrapper in her lap. 3 days ago. Marcus turned fully then. 3 days. Zora nodded. She left in the morning and told me to stay with Mrs. Alvarez downstairs if she was late. She said if she did not come back by the second night, I had to go to the place in Midtown with the stone lions because rich people go there and someone would know where your event was. Nathaniel blinked once. The New York Public Library. She had started there. Alone. You have been looking for me for 2 days? He asked. Almost. Her voice stayed even, but it cost her something. I got the wrong building yesterday. For a moment, no one in the car moved. The city kept flowing around them, indifferent and glittering. Nathaniel could not stop picturing the route in his mind. Queens to Midtown, trains, sidewalks, crowds that never slowed, security desks that ignored children in old coats, adults who looked over her shoulder instead of into her face. She had crossed all of it carrying a message meant for him. Did your mother tell you why I mattered? He asked. Zora nodded faintly. She said you used to be a good man before money taught you how to stop listening. Marcus looked down to hide whatever crossed his face. Nathaniel did not. He sat very still, as if the sentence had found the exact place inside him where years of carefully managed control could still be reached by a simple truth. Then the SUV slowed. Marcus glanced ahead through the windshield. We have company, he said. Nathaniel looked toward the rear window, just as a pair of headlights turned with them and held the same distance through the next light. Marcus did not raise his voice. He never did. That was how Nathaniel knew the situation had shifted. The man only grew quieter when the room, or in this case the street, demanded precision. Nathaniel turned just enough to catch the twin headlights in the rear glass, blurred by rain and city glow, steady through one light, then another. Not close enough to force attention. Not far enough to be chance. Zora followed his gaze and pulled the scarf tighter around her shoulders without saying a word. She had already learned the rhythm of danger. That much was clear. How long? Nathaniel asked. Marcus touched the wire at his collar, listened, then answered. Since Lexington. The SUV rolled through a yellow light and eased past a row of dark storefronts, their holiday displays still glowing behind locked glass. A silver tree turned slowly in one window. In another, mannequins stood beneath warm spotlights, frozen in expensive stillness. Outside, the city kept moving as if none of this mattered. Cabs surged past in streaks of amber. Steam lifted from a street grate and vanished into the cold. Somewhere on the corner, a man sold roasted chestnuts beneath a striped umbrella, the smoke rising soft and sweet into the rain. Nathaniel looked toward the driver. Lose them. The driver gave one short nod and took the next right without signaling. Zora's hand tightened around the empty water bottle in her lap. The plastic crackled in the quiet. Nathaniel noticed and reached across the space between them, taking the bottle gently from her fingers before it split under pressure. You do not have to be afraid in here, he said. She met his eyes for a second, then looked down. I am not afraid in here, she whispered. I am afraid of what happens if they catch up. Nathaniel sat back, the answer landing with more force than the child's small voice should have carried. 9 years old, and already speaking in outcomes. Already measuring fear in terms of what came after. Marcus's phone vibrated once. He checked the secure display and swore under his breath, so quietly it was almost polite. Nathaniel heard it anyway. What is it? Marcus turned in his seat. The first vehicle. Nathaniel's face hardened. What about it? The one you were supposed to take from the museum. It was clipped at the corner of 58th and Madison by a delivery van that ran a light. He paused. No serious injuries. Driver is shaken. Rear panel took the hit. Silence spread through the cabin like cold water. Nathaniel looked toward the dark window again. Had he left 30 seconds sooner, had he dismissed the girl with the tired indifference wealth can teach so easily, he would have been in that vehicle. Not harmed, maybe. Not necessarily. But delayed. Exposed. Contained long enough for someone else to decide the rest. Zora watched his face carefully. That was supposed to be your car, she said. It was not a question. Nathaniel nodded once. Marcus looked back toward the rear window. The tail is still there. The headlights had stayed with them through the last turn. Patient. Disciplined. Nathaniel rubbed one thumb slowly against the edge of his watch band, an old habit from years he no longer liked to remember. His younger brother Daniel used to do the same thing before exams, before speeches, before telling the truth in rooms where truth was not welcome. Daniel. The name had been circling him. All night, like a ghost waiting to be invited in. Nathaniel leaned forward. Zora, I need you to tell me exactly what your mother said. No guessing. No skipping. The exact words. She frowned in concentration, small brow furrowing beneath the loose curls at her temple. She said if she did not come home, I had to find you and show you the picture. Then she said, he will know what they buried if he finally chooses to look at it. Nathaniel felt something old shift under his ribs. Not memory. Not yet. More like the sound of a locked door somewhere in the dark beginning to move. Marcus turned halfway, watching him now instead of the road. Sir. Nathaniel did not answer at once. He was looking at the city, but not seeing it. Buried. Marisol had chosen that word on purpose. She always chose words on purpose. Years ago, when legal review still happened in conference rooms instead of through layers of sanitized filters and outside counsel, she had once told him that the most dangerous lies were the ones large institutions buried inside process. Not erased. Buried. Kept safe beneath paperwork, timing, and silence. Nathaniel had laughed then, too young in his arrogance to hear warning when it came in a calm voice. Now that voice belonged to a missing woman and her daughter sitting across from him in borrowed wool. The driver cut left suddenly, then right again, threading through traffic with smooth, practiced control. The trailing headlights disappeared for one block, then returned in the side mirror. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Professional enough not to panic. Sloppy enough to stay visible. That is interesting. Nathaniel knew what he meant. Men who truly wanted to disappear usually did. Visible pursuit could be a message. Pressure. A way of making him choose the wrong shelter, call the wrong person, trust the wrong circle. Do not take us to the townhouse, he said. Marcus nodded immediately. Already changed route. Zora looked between them. Where are we going now? Nathaniel reached into his coat and took out the folded half-burned photograph again. Under the moving cabin light, the edges looked even darker, the singed paper thin as dried leaves. He stared at the faint outline of the woman beside two boys at a lake, and suddenly noticed something he had missed on the museum steps. In the corner, barely visible beneath the burn, was part of a date stamp. August 14th. The year had been damaged, but the place had not. Cedar Hollow. Nathaniel's mouth went still. Cedar Hollow was not just an old family retreat in Connecticut. It was the last place he, Daniel, and Marisol had ever been in the same photograph. He looked up slowly, the city lights sliding across his face in pale bands. We are going, he said, voice low and exact now. To find out why your mother sent me a picture from a day that was never supposed to matter. The SUV crossed into the darker stretch of the Upper East Side just as the rain began to thin into a fine silver mist, the kind that made the streetlights look softer but never made the city kinder. Nathaniel kept the photograph in his hand now, unfolded across his palm, studying it the way men study damage after realizing it is older than they thought. Cedar Hollow. The faint date. The blurred edge of a summer no one had spoken about in years. Across from him, Zora sat very still beneath the heavy scarf, her small frame nearly swallowed by leather and shadow, but her eyes never left his face for long. She was watching him the way children watched weather, not because they understood it, but because they knew it could change everything around them in a single minute. Marcus spoke quietly into his phone, rerouting drivers, canceling arrivals, moving pieces across the board Nathaniel had spent years believing only he controlled. The tail split off at 63rd, he said at last, slipping the phone away. Either they lost us or they wanted us to know they could stay close if they chose. Nathaniel nodded without looking up. They wanted pressure. Marcus did not disagree. Outside, the city kept shining with its usual indifference. A woman under a clear umbrella hurried past a florist locking up for the night. A doorman in a dark coat stood beneath a striped awning, shoulders tucked against the cold. Somewhere a siren wailed and then faded, swallowed by blocks of glass and stone. It struck Nathaniel then, with a kind of quiet cruelty, that the city looked exactly the same on nights when lives turned without warning. It did not dim for grief. It did not pause for truth. It only reflected whatever passed through it and moved on. Zora leaned forward slightly. "What is Cedar Hollow?" she asked. Nathaniel folded the photograph again, but more slowly this time. "A lake house in Connecticut," he said. "It belonged to my family before my father sold it." Zora waited, sensing there was more. Nathaniel looked past her to the rain tracking down the window. "It was the last place my brother looked happy." The words came out flatter than he intended, not because he did not feel them, but because he had practiced not feeling them for so long that even now grief arrived in him dressed as control. Zora lowered her gaze. "Is he the one they talked about?" Nathaniel met her eyes. "You heard his name?" She nodded once. "At the loading gate. The man with the ring said, if Price starts asking about his brother again, the old file comes up too." "I did not know what file. I only knew they were scared you might remember something." Marcus turned in his seat so sharply the leather creaked. Nathaniel did not move at all. The old file. Memory sharpened in him by fragments. A compliance review. Missing signatures. Daniel insisting something in the internal transfers did not add up. Marisol standing in a conference room with 2 manila folders pressed to her chest, telling him in her calm, maddeningly patient voice that silence did not make a lie safer, only more expensive. He had brushed it aside then. Market pressure. Acquisition season. Too many moving parts. He had told himself there would be time to circle back. There never was. Daniel died 6 weeks later in what the papers called an accident on a rain-slick road in Westchester. Marisol resigned 2 days after the funeral. Or that was the story the company told. Nathaniel suddenly wondered how many stories in his life had been built by people who counted on him being too wounded, too proud, or too busy to verify them. "Sir," Marcus said, "careful now. If this connects to your brother, then the circle is smaller than we thought." Nathaniel gave a humorless smile. That is the problem with old betrayals. They age well. Zora sat with that sentence for a moment, not fully understanding it, but feeling its temperature. Then she asked the question that mattered more than any of the others. "Did my mother trust you?" Nathaniel looked at her, really looked, and for a second the answer shamed him with its complexity. Marisol had respected him once, maybe even believed in the better version of him that still existed before power became routine. Trusted him completely? No, not by the end. Not after he failed to hear what she had tried to tell him. "I think," he said slowly, "she trusted the man I used to be." Zora absorbed that in silence, her fingers curling into the scarf at her collar. The SUV eased to a stop beneath the covered entrance of a narrow limestone building with dark windows and no sign out front. Not the townhouse. Not anywhere on Nathaniel's public calendar. Marcus opened his door first, checked the street, then signaled the all clear. Nathaniel stepped out into the cold and turned back for Zora. She hesitated only a second before placing her small hand in his. Her fingers were still cold. Inside, the building smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, the lobby lit by amber lamps that threw soft light across polished wood floors. No staff, no portraits, no trace of ownership except the quiet that money could buy when it truly wanted privacy. Zora looked around, wary but curious. Nathaniel led her toward the elevator, the photograph still in his coat, the past now walking beside him in the shape of a child. As the elevator doors slid closed, Marcus's phone lit up again. He glanced down, and something in his face changed. "Sir," he said, voice lower than before, "we just pulled archived security from the gala perimeter." Nathaniel looked up. Marcus held the screen tighter in his hand. "Marisol Bennett was there tonight. Less than 10 minutes before Zora reached you." The elevator rose in near silence, smooth and soundless except for the faint mechanical hum behind the walls, but inside Nathaniel the world had become far less controlled than the polished brass panel in front of him suggested. Marisol Bennett had been at the gala. Not last week. Not in some grainy archive from years ago. Tonight. Less than 10 minutes before Zora found him on the museum steps. The fact settled over him not like surprise, but like a key turning inside a lock he had spent years pretending did not exist. Zora stood beside him now, small and tired, one hand still wrapped in the dark wool of his scarf, the other at her side, fingers slightly curled as if she had learned not to expect doors to stay open. She looked up at him, searching his face. "You saw her?" she asked. Marcus answered before Nathaniel could. A camera caught someone matching her description near the east barricade. Put up. No direct facial frame, but the height, code, and movement pattern line up. Zora's breathing changed. Not faster. Sharper. Hope, when it came after fear, always sounded fragile. Then she is alive. Nathaniel looked at Marcus. "Show me." The elevator doors opened onto a quiet private floor dressed in dark oak, amber lamps, and the kind of expensive stillness that could make even grief seem well managed if you were not careful. Marcus led them down a short hallway into a narrow sitting room lined with books no one had touched in months. A fire had been laid earlier in the evening by staff who assumed the house would remain empty, and now low flames moved behind black iron mesh, filling the room with cedar heat and a faint golden flicker. Zora stopped just inside the doorway, suddenly uncertain in a world built for adults who never had to ask permission twice. Nathaniel crossed to the sideboard, poured a glass of water, then crouched slightly so he could hand it to her at eye level. "Sit down," he said gently. "You are safe here." She took the glass with both hands and lowered herself onto the edge of the sofa without leaning back, as if comfort was still something she had to earn. Marcus placed his phone on the coffee table and enlarged the frozen frame. Grainy. Rain-specked. Angled from above. But there she was, near the stone balustrade beyond the donor entrance. Put up. Dark coat. One shoulder turned. A messenger bag across her body. Nathaniel stared at the image until the room seemed to narrow around it. The stance struck him first. Marisol had always stood like that when she was thinking hard. Her weight shifted slightly left, chin tucked, one shoulder lower than the other, as if bracing against a wind no one else felt. "It is her," he said. Zora was already leaning forward, her water forgotten. "Can you zoom in more?" Marcus did. The image broke into rougher pixels, but something glinted at the woman's wrist. A thin silver bracelet. Zora's lips parted. "That is hers." Nathaniel looked at her. "You are sure?" She nodded quickly. "It has a small moon charm on it. She let me hold it when I was scared during storms." For a moment, no one spoke. The fire shifted softly. Rain whispered at the windows. Somewhere deeper in the townhouse, an old pipe clicked once and fell quiet again. Nathaniel kept looking at the image, but his mind was reaching backward now, pulling loose things toward each other. Marisol at the gala. Men at the loading gate. The burned photograph from Cedar Hollow. Daniel's name spoken in a service lane 15 years after his death. None of it felt random anymore. It felt arranged. What happened after this frame? Nathaniel asked. Marcus swiped to the next capture. Empty walkway. Then another. A blur near the side drive. Another camera angle showed two men stepping into view too late to intercept whoever had moved out of frame. One wore a dark overcoat. The other, even in low resolution, showed a flash of silver at his hand. Ring. Black stone. Zora's eyes locked on the screen. That is him. Nathaniel felt his jaw tighten. Can we track where she went? Marcus shook his head once. Not yet. The east cameras were partially obstructed by event delivery trucks. Whoever planned this understood blind spots. Nathaniel almost smiled at the precision of that. Almost. Instead he straightened, turned away from the table, and stood with one hand on the mantel, staring into the fire as if memory might rise more cleanly through flame. She was there to reach me, he said. Not to watch. Not to threaten. To transfer something. Marcus followed the line of thought immediately. Zora. Nathaniel nodded. Zora looked between them, still trying to catch up to adult implications moving at adult speed. My mother saw me get to you. Nathaniel turned back toward her. I think she made sure of it. Zora's shoulders dropped an inch, relief fighting disbelief across her small face. Then why did she not come with me? That question stayed in the room longer than the others. Nathaniel did not rush the answer because children heard false reassurance more clearly than adults ever admitted. Because, he said carefully, she believed someone was watching her more closely than they were watching you. Zora looked down into the water glass. She always said grown-ups ignore little girls until it is too late. Nathaniel closed his eyes for the briefest second. There it was again, that terrible economy of childhood shaped by danger. The knowledge of invisibility taught too early and used as protection because there was nothing else. Marcus's phone buzzed once more. He checked it, then glanced at Nathaniel. We ran the delivery gate plates. One vehicle is linked to a shell company that used to manage archived property records for Price Strategic before the restructuring. Nathaniel turned slowly. Used to. Until 14 years ago. Marcus held his gaze. It was dissolved by order of Adrian Kessler. The name hit the room like a dropped stone. Zora frowned. Who was that? Nathaniel did not answer right away. Adrian Kessler had once been his father's fixer before becoming the company's quiet architect of undesirable solutions. Legal containment. Silent separations. Problems made to disappear behind process and paid signatures. He had retired publicly 12 years earlier with speeches, articles, and a watch Nathaniel himself had handed him at a reception he barely remembered. Nathaniel looked back at the grainy image of Marisol near the gala entrance and felt, for the first time that night, something colder than fear began to form. Not panic. Direction. Adrian Kessler, he said at last, voice flat and exact, is a man who spent his whole life helping powerful people bury the truth. Zora gripped the glass tighter. And my mother found something he buried? Nathaniel met her eyes. The firelight moved across her face, warming the edge of her cheek, but not the question in it. No, he said quietly. I think your mother found something he failed to keep buried. Nathaniel did not speak for several seconds after the words left his mouth. The fire moved softly behind the iron screen, throwing slow amber light across the bookshelves and the edge of the rug, but the room no longer felt warm. It felt narrowed, as if truth had quietly stepped through the door and taken up space no one could ignore. Zora sat motionless on the sofa, the water glass cradled in both hands, her dark eyes fixed on him with a seriousness no child should have had to earn. Marcus stood near the coffee table, one hand at his side, the other still holding the phone that displayed Marisol's grainy image near the gala entrance. For a moment, all three of them seemed to be listening to the same thing. Not the rain at the windows. Not the low crackle of cedar in the fireplace. Something older. Something shifting beneath years of carefully arranged silence. Tell me about Adrian Kessler, Zora said at last. Her voice was steady, but softer now, as if the name itself carried a chill. Nathaniel turned from the mantel and looked at her. He worked for my father first, he said, then for the company. He handled problems that powerful people did not want attached to their names. Legal cleanups. Quiet exits. Properties moved through shell firms. Records buried in process until nobody knew what they were looking at anymore. Zora frowned, trying to sort adult corruption into something a 9-year-old mind could hold. So he makes bad things disappear. Nathaniel gave the smallest nod. Yes. Marcus added. And men like that do not retire in the way normal people retire. They simply step out of public view and keep their hands clean. Zora lowered her gaze to the water in her glass, watching the firelight ripple across it. My mother said there are people who never shout because they have money to let other people do the shouting for them. Nathaniel almost smiled, but it faded before it fully formed. That sounded exactly like Marisol. Calm, precise, able to describe an entire moral rot in one clean sentence. He crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite the sofa, not above her, not pacing, but grounded now, as if he understood that this conversation needed more than authority. It needed witness. When was the last time you saw your mother act afraid? He asked. Zora thought for a long moment. She did not act afraid, she said. She acted careful. Nathaniel waited. 3 nights ago she came home late and locked the top lock and the bottom one, which she only does when she is worried. She turned off the kitchen light and looked out the window for a long time before she talked to me. Then she packed a small bag, but left it by the door instead of taking it. Marcus shifted, following every detail. Nathaniel kept his voice low. What did she say? Zora swallowed. She said if someone ever asks you to trust them quickly, do not. She said if someone tells you not to ask questions, ask too. Then she gave me the picture and told me your name. Her fingers tightened around the glass. I asked if we were in trouble, and she said, not yet, baby. But trouble finally remembered our address. The room went still again. Nathaniel looked down at his hands. He had negotiated mergers that changed industries, stared down boards, governments, rivals, markets. But no conversation in years had made him feel the shape of his own failures like that one sentence from a missing woman. Trouble remembered our address. He thought of Daniel saying the transfer records felt wrong. He thought of Marisol trying to flag an internal review. He thought of all the elegant explanations he had accepted because they fit the pace of power better than truth did. Sir, Marcus said carefully, if Kessler is connected to the old property archive shell company, then Cedar Hollow may not just be sentimental. It may be operational. Nathaniel looked up. Meaning? Marcus stepped to the table, pulled the phone back toward him, and opened another file his team had sent moments earlier. A scanned property ledger appeared, grainy from age, but legible enough. Cedar Hollow was sold publicly by your father. But 6 months after the sale, the boathouse and lower storage annex were transferred through a holding group tied to Kessler's legal network. Nathaniel stared at the screen. Why would anyone keep the annex? Marcus did not answer. He did not need to. Storage. Records. Things too sensitive to live in the main house, too useful to destroy. Zora looked between them. You think my mother found something there? Nathaniel leaned back slowly, the answer taking shape even as he resisted it. I think your mother knew where to look because she was there once. Zora blinked. At the lake house? Nathaniel nodded. Memory arrived then not as a full picture, but as texture. Summer air. Damp wood. Daniel laughing at the dock. Marisol standing near the side path with 2 folders tucked under one arm, arguing quietly with him while his father entertained guests inside. He had dismissed her concerns that day, told her not everything needed to become a moral emergency. Her face had gone very still. He remembered that now with painful clarity. The stillness of someone realizing she had been speaking to the wrong version of a man. Nathaniel. Zora's voice pulled him back. He met her eyes. My mother said you would know when you saw the picture. He exhaled slowly. I know more now than I did an hour ago. It was not enough, and they all felt that. Marcus's phone buzzed again. He checked the message, then lifted his gaze. There is more. The camera picked up Marisol, leaving something behind near the museum east steps. Security assumed it was trash and bagged it with event debris. Zora sat up so fast the water nearly spilled. What was it? Marcus looked at the screen one more time. A library card. Nathaniel's expression sharpened instantly. The public library? Marcus nodded. Issued in Marisol Bennett's name. And according to the timestamp, she dropped it on purpose less than 1 minute before Zora reached you. Nathaniel stood. The room seemed to tighten with him. Zora was already on her feet too, the scarf slipping from one shoulder, forgotten in the sudden surge of hope and urgency on her face. Nathaniel looked at Marcus. Give me access to every branch record tied to that card. Locker rentals, archive requests, reading room logs, anything. Marcus was already moving. Zora stepped closer, her small hands open at her sides, trembling now not from cold, but from possibility. She left a trail, she whispered. Nathaniel looked down at the child who had crossed the city alone because the adults around her had failed to move fast enough. And for the first time, that night his voice carried something warmer than control. No, he said quietly. She left us a map. Marcus moved fast, but the room had changed before he even reached the door. A minute earlier it had been a hiding place, warm with cedar and low firelight, a sealed pocket of calm borrowed from money and thick walls. Now it felt like a relay point in a race neither Nathaniel nor Zora had known they were already running. The little girl stood near the coffee table with his dark scarf slipping from one shoulder, her eyes bright in a face still marked by cold and exhaustion. Hope had done that to her all at once. It had straightened her spine, sharpened her breathing, lit something fragile and fierce beneath the fear. Nathaniel saw it and felt the weight of it immediately. Hope in a child was not a small thing. It was a responsibility. Sit back down. For 1 minute, he said, not sharply, but with the kind of quiet authority that made room for care instead of control. Zora hesitated, then obeyed, lowering herself onto the sofa again with both hands folded in her lap, as if she were bracing against movement inside her own chest. Nathaniel crossed to the sideboard, opened a drawer, and took out a small cashmere throw the color of ash. He draped it gently over her knees. You are shivering. Zora looked down at the blanket, then back up at him. I am trying not to. Nathaniel let out the faintest breath through his nose. Not quite a laugh. Not quite sorrow. You do not need to try so hard in here. The words stayed between them longer than expected. Children who had learned to survive by staying composed rarely believed rest the first time it was offered. Marcus was already in the hallway coordinating with his team, his voice low and clipped, footsteps fading over polished wood. The townhouse settled around them with soft, expensive silence. Rain touched the windows in a thin whisper. The fire shifted and sighed behind the screen. Somewhere above them a heating vent clicked on, then steadied into a low hum. Nathaniel sat across from Zora again, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely, and for the first time that night he allowed himself to look at her without also scanning the room for danger. She was 9. That fact kept returning with quiet force. 9 years old, and she had crossed the city alone with a message no adult had been brave enough to carry openly. Her coat was too large. Her sneakers were still damp. One sock had slipped lower than the other inside her shoe. She had the alert eyes of a child who had been told more truth than comfort. "Did your mother ever take you to the library herself?" he asked. Zora nodded. "Sometimes on Saturdays. Mostly the big one in Midtown, because she said it made her think better." Nathaniel recognized the sentence immediately. It sounded like Marisol. She had always distrusted rooms without windows and men without questions. Did she use lockers there? Zora frowned in concentration. "Not the regular kind. Once she told me to wait by the maps while she went downstairs with a lady at a desk that was not really a desk. It was behind a wall." Nathaniel's gaze sharpened. "Special collections. Restricted archive access. Reading rooms that lived beneath public noise and polished stone." "Did she ever mention a number?" Zora closed her eyes, thinking hard now, pressing one finger lightly against her thumb the way children did when trying to catch a slippery memory before it vanished. "Maybe 11, she said. Or 111. She wrote it on the back of a receipt once, and then tore it up." Nathaniel leaned back slowly. 111 could be a locker, a catalog request, a box number, a private call slip. With Marisol, it was never random. Marcus returned less than a minute later, bringing cold air from the hallway with him and a slim folder already printing from the secure office down the hall. "Library access logs will take a few minutes," he said. But the event cleanup team found the card. It was recovered with a folded paper inside the sleeve. Zora sat up so quickly the blanket slid to the floor. Nathaniel picked it up automatically and set it beside her while Marcus handed over a clear evidence pouch. Inside was a library card in Marisol Bennett's name and, tucked behind it, a narrow strip of paper torn from the edge of a checkout receipt. On it, in neat blue ink, were 6 words written so precisely they felt almost spoken. "Do not trust the first answer." Nathaniel stared at the note. Then he closed his eyes for one brief second. That was Marisol too. Not dramatic. Not pleading. A direction sharp enough to cut through panic. "What does it mean?" Zora asked. Nathaniel turned the strip over. Nothing on the back. No branch. No number. Just the sentence. Marcus set the printed folder on the table and opened it. "Initial trace is coming in. Marisol used the card twice in the last month. One request was public records related to shoreline property transfers in Connecticut. The other was an archival newspaper pull from August, 15 years ago." Nathaniel's fingers tightened around the evidence pouch. "August. Cedar Hollow. Daniel." Threads were beginning to cross now in ways too deliberate to ignore. Zora watched him with that same weather-wise stillness, her small face lit by firelight and worry. "That is when the picture was taken," she whispered. Nathaniel looked at her. "Yes." Marcus scanned the second page. "There is more." A librarian flagged an unusual access request tied to the same card 2 days ago. The material was not delivered because the requester never returned to collect it. Nathaniel stood. "What material?" Marcus looked up from the page. "A sealed local report from New Canaan, Connecticut, concerning an incident at Cedar Hollow that was never fully published." The room seemed to narrow again, not with fear this time, but with direction. Zora rose too, her hand reaching for the edge of the sofa before she steadied herself. Nathaniel saw the fatigue in the slight sway of her shoulders, the way her body was finally remembering it was made of bone and sleep and hunger, not only purpose. He stepped closer and pulled the throwback around her. "You are not going anywhere else tonight," he said. "I will not leave you unprotected." Zora searched his face. "But you are going." Nathaniel did not lie to her. "Yes." Marcus closed the folder. "I can have a team at the library in 7 minutes." Nathaniel shook his head once. "No team in uniform. No visible push. Marisol left this for me because she expected the obvious route to be watched." He looked down at the note again. "Do not trust the first answer." Then he looked at Zora, At the little girl who had been overlooked by almost everyone until truth decided to travel in her voice. Your mother did not leave breadcrumbs, he said softly. She left filters. Zora tilted her head. What does that mean? Nathaniel slipped the note back into the pouch with careful fingers. It means she knew somebody would help us quickly, he said. And she knew the quick help might be exactly what gets us lied to first. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and the controlled stillness in his face shifted by a fraction. Sir, he said, voice lower now. The first answer just arrived. Someone at the library says there is no record of any sealed Cedar Hollow report. Nathaniel's eyes went cold and clear at once. He took the note from the pouch again, read the 6 words one more time, and then looked up. Good, he said quietly. Now we know we are asking the right question. Nathaniel did not move right away after Marcus delivered the message. He stood near the coffee table with the evidence pouch in one hand and the folded note in the other, the firelight catching the edge of the plastic and throwing a thin reflection across his knuckles. No record of any sealed Cedar Hollow report. The sentence should have ended the line of inquiry for anyone who still believed institutions told the truth the first time they were asked. But Marisol had known better, and now Nathaniel understood why she had chosen those 6 words instead of anything longer. Do not trust the first answer. It was not just a warning. It was a test. A filter. A way of separating honest confusion from controlled denial. Zora watched him from the sofa, blanket wrapped around her knees, her eyes moving between his face and Marcus as if reading the weather in 2 different skies. So they lied, she said quietly. Nathaniel looked at her. Yes. He did not soften it. She was too sharp for false language, and this night had already taken enough from her without giving her the insult of being spoken to like she was fragile. Marcus checked the time on his phone. I can send someone to the main branch under a different name. Nathaniel shook his head once. No one connected to me. No corporate security. No legal staff. If the first answer was controlled, then the next visible question will close the door completely. He crossed to the desk built into the far wall and opened a narrow drawer most people in the house did not know existed. Inside were old things, personal things, the kind wealth never displayed because they could not be turned into status. A fountain pen, a hotel key card from London, a watch that no longer worked, a plain leather address book worn soft at the edges. Nathaniel took the book out and flipped through it slowly. Zora pulled the blanket tighter around herself and watched in silence. The room smelled of cedar, paper, and rain drying on wool. The fire had burned lower now, settling into a deeper orange glow that left more of the corners in shadow. For the first time since she arrived, the urgency between them had softened just enough to reveal something quieter beneath it. Fatigue. Grief. The stubborn shape of trust trying to form. Nathaniel stopped on a page and stared at a name he had not touched in years. Eleanor Pike. Former head archivist, New York Public Library Special Collections. Retired. Fierce. Unimpressed by money. Daniel had liked her instantly because she once corrected a senator in public without raising her voice. Nathaniel had not spoken to her in nearly 12 years. He looked up at Marcus. Find me a current number for Eleanor Pike. Marcus blinked once, then nodded and stepped out to make the call. Zora tilted her head. Who is she? A woman who loved records more than reputation, Nathaniel said. Which means if someone buried something in a library system, she may know where the ground is uneven. Zora considered that and gave the smallest nod, as if it made perfect sense to her that buildings, like people, could hide disturbed earth beneath polished surfaces. Nathaniel sat down across from her again, the address book resting on one knee. For a moment neither of them spoke. Rain traced slow silver lines down the tall windows. A siren passed somewhere far below and dissolved into the city. The house held its breath around them. Zora looked down at the blanket. When my mom was worried, she used to clean things that were already clean. Nathaniel glanced at her. Why? She said some people pray and some people organize. The answer landed in him with surprising force. Marisol again. Even absent, she was still shaping the room through the precision of her habits, the clarity of her warnings, the child she had raised to notice what mattered. Nathaniel leaned back, studying Zora more carefully now that the first shock had passed. Her face had softened with warmth, but not with safety yet. Her shoes were still on, her posture still ready. Even tired, she looked like she expected to be moved again at any minute. Did she tell you anything else about Cedar Hollow? He asked. Zora thought for a long moment. Only once. She said people think lakes keep secrets because the surface looks calm. Nathaniel's jaw tightened very slightly. That was not a poetic line. It was evidence disguised as memory. Marcus returned with the phone already in hand. I have Eleanor. Nathaniel took the call without hesitation. The line clicked. Then a woman's voice came through, older now, roughened by age but still edged with intelligence sharp enough to cut through politeness. Nathaniel Price, she said. Not hello. Not why are you calling. Just his name like a fact she had no particular interest in decorating. That must mean either the world is ending or you finally learned how archives work. Zora looked up, surprised. Nathaniel almost smiled. Perhaps both, he said. I need to ask about a sealed local report tied to Cedar Hollow, August 15 years ago. Silence met him for one long second. Then Eleanor exhaled slowly. You should not be asking that on an open line. Nathaniel's fingers tightened on the phone. So it exists. Of course it exists, she said. The question is why someone is trying to make sure you never see it. Nathaniel glanced at Marcus. Marcus had already gone still. Zora was sitting straight now, eyes wide, every bit of her awake again. Can you access it? Nathaniel asked. Eleanor gave a dry, humorless sound. Not from home. Not anymore. But I can tell you where it was moved when the public copy disappeared. Nathaniel stood without realizing he had stood. Where? Her answer came low and exact. Not the main branch. Not special collections. It was rerouted to the off-site preservation annex under a false flood damage classification. Box 111. Bryant Park sublevel access. Zora's mouth parted. 111. Nathaniel's gaze snapped to her. Then back to the dark window where rain kept writing the same restless pattern over the glass. Marcus was already reaching for his coat. Eleanor spoke one more time before Nathaniel could thank her. And Nathaniel, she said, the edge in her voice sharpening. If Marisol Bennett sent you there, do not go alone. The last man who asked for that file never made it to the reading room. For one suspended second after Eleanor ended the call, no one in the room moved. The fire had burned down to a bed of deep orange coals. The rain still traced the windows in thin silver lines, and the house held that strange rich silence that could almost make danger feel civilized if you let it. But Nathaniel did not let it. He stood near the desk with the phone still in his hand, hearing the last sentence again in Eleanor Pike's flat, unadorned voice. The last man who asked for that file never made it to the reading room. Zora sat wrapped in the cashmere throw, her small face tilted up toward him, the name of the box still hanging in the air between them like a code finally cracking open. 111. The number her mother had written once and torn up. The number hidden behind a wall, behind a desk that was not really a desk. Marcus was already moving, pulling his coat from the chair back, checking his sidearm only by habit before thinking better of it, and leaving it untouched. Nathaniel saw the motion and made the decision before Marcus could speak. No weapons, he said. Marcus looked up. Sir, this is a library annex, not a war zone. That depends on who else knows we are coming. Nathaniel met his gaze. Then we do this clean. Quiet. No convoy. No men in obvious formation. If someone buried the file inside institutional process, they are counting on us to arrive like a threat. We do not give them that. Marcus held his stare a moment longer, then nodded once. 2 cars. 1 decoy. 1 real. Nathaniel agreed. He turned toward Zora and saw at once what the last 10 minutes had cost her. Adrenaline had held her upright, but only just. Her eyes were still bright, still intent, but there was a softness creeping into her posture now, the kind that came when a child's body began remembering it was tired no matter what the night demanded. He crouched in front of her, so they were eye level. You are staying here. Zora's expression changed instantly. No, it was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was certain. Nathaniel kept his voice steady. This next part is not safe. Neither was the first part. Her chin lifted, small and stubborn, and for one brief second he saw exactly whose daughter she was. My mother left the map for me too. Marcus glanced away, hiding what might have been the edge of reluctant respect. Nathaniel did not. He stayed there in front of her, his hands loose, his posture open, because power had taught him long ago that forcing obedience and earning trust were not the same thing. He also knew, with a clarity that came too late in life more often than he liked, that frightened children recognized false choices immediately. If I take you, he said quietly, I have to split my attention. Half on the file, half on you. If I leave you here, all of me goes to finding your mother faster. Zora looked down at the blanket gathered in her lap. Her fingers worked the edge of it once, then stilled. What if you find something, and I am not there to understand it? Nathaniel felt the weight of that question more than its words. She was not asking to be included out of curiosity. She was asking not to be left behind by the truth again. Then I bring it back to you, he said. And I tell you everything. Not the polished version. Not the easy version. Everything. Zora searched his face the way wounded people did when they were trying to decide whether a promise belonged to the speaker or only to the moment. Whatever she found there made her swallow hard and nod once. Do not let them tell you the clean story, she whispered. Nathaniel's throat tightened unexpectedly. I will not. Marcus stepped toward the door. We need to move in 4 minutes. Nathaniel rose. The room sharpened around him. He took the burned photograph, the library card, and Marisol's note, sliding all three into a slim leather folio instead of his coat pocket. This was no longer evidence collected in panic. It was a chain. He could feel that now. A deliberate sequence built by a woman who had once trusted the better part of him and, apparently, decided at the final hour that better part was still worth betting on. He crossed to the console near the entry and keyed in a private security code. A soft chime sounded upstairs. Within seconds, Mrs. Alvarez emerged from the service hallway, silver-haired, compact, still in her navy evening cardigan, having clearly been called in from the staff quarters without complaint or confusion. She took one look at Zora and the blanket and the tired courage in the child's face, and something in her expression gentled. Come with me, sweetheart, she said. I have hot chocolate and dry socks, and I make no promises about the quality of my grilled cheese, but people tend to forgive it. Zora looked at Nathaniel first. He gave the smallest nod. I will come back. Mrs. Alvarez extended a hand. Zora slid off the sofa, the cashmere throw slipping to the floor, and took it. But before she let herself be led away, she stepped back toward Nathaniel and reached into the pocket of her oversized coat. She pulled out something tiny and folded and placed it in his palm. A yellowed bus. Transfer stub. He frowned. What is this? My mother tucked it inside the picture before she gave it to me, Zora said. I thought it was trash until I looked closer. Nathaniel unfolded it. On the back, written in the same neat blue ink as the library note, were 4 words, in a time. Do not miss midnight rain. Marcus saw it and frowned. Midnight rain. Nathaniel looked toward the windows. The weather report had called for clearing skies by 11. No more rain after that. Unless midnight rain was not weather at all. Unless it was a phrase, a code, a file title, a train, a password, a scheduled transfer. Marisol had given him another hinge, another turn. The house suddenly felt too still, the hour too thin. He closed his hand around the stub and looked at Zora. Get some warmth in you. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone unless Mrs. Alvarez says my name first. Zora nodded. Bring my mother back. The sentence was small, almost level, but it hit him harder than any threat that night. Nathaniel inclined his head once, not because certainty was possible, but because reverence was. Then he turned and followed Marcus into the hallway, the leather folio under one arm, the bus transfer in his fist, and as the front door opened to the cold, wet dark of the city, he understood something he should have learned years ago. Power could move markets, silence people, buy buildings, bend headlines. But it was a little black girl in damp sneakers and a missing woman's handwriting that had finally made him move fast enough to deserve the truth. The city after 11 o'clock had a different face. It was still New York, still all glass and steam and reflected light, but the polished confidence of the evening had thinned into something rawer, more honest. Delivery trucks idled at curbs. Night crews moved in fluorescent vests beneath scaffold shadows. Windows that had glowed with dinners and parties an hour earlier had gone dark one by one, leaving whole blocks to the rain-slick shine of street lamps and the occasional flicker of television blue behind high apartment glass. Nathaniel sat in the rear seat of the second car with Marisol's folio on one side of him and the yellow bus transfer in his hand, turning it over again and again beneath. The passing wash of streetlight. Do not miss midnight rain. The phrase had settled into him like a tune with one note missing. Marcus sat in front, half turned toward the windshield, half angled toward the tablet balanced on his knee, tracking routes, traffic cameras, patrol density, and the kind of invisible movement men like Adrian Kessler relied on when they wanted the world to seem empty. The first car had already peeled off toward the east side as planned. Decoy. Visible. Predictable. This one moved west in silence. Nathaniel watched the reflection of rain streak across the window and tried to think like Marisol. Not like a billionaire. Not like a strategist. Like a woman who knew the obvious answer would be false, who had no time left for speeches, only enough room to build a path someone worthy might still follow. Weather report? He asked. Marcus did not look up. Rain ends before midnight. Skies clear by 11:40. Nathaniel nodded. So midnight rain was not meteorology. It was instruction, or location, or title, or access phrase. His thumb brushed the edge of the paper again, and he suddenly noticed something he had missed in the townhouse. Along the bottom margin of the transfer stub, nearly erased by age and fold lines, was a faded route stamp in blue ink. B47. He sat forward. Marcus. Marcus turned. Nathaniel held out the stub. What is B47? Marcus took it, glanced once, then handed it back. Old City Bus Line designation. Discontinued years ago. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. Running where? Marcus tapped into another screen, fingers moving fast. Archive route map is pulling. The car passed beneath the stone-lined shadows of the main library without slowing, heading instead toward the lower service entrances near Bryant Park where the city seemed to lose some of its grandeur and show its machinery. Marcus read from the screen. B47 was a temporary shuttle route 15 years ago during transit construction. Midtown to New Canaan Transfer Rail Hub and back. Limited late service. Final inbound arrival into the city was scheduled at 11:58. Nathaniel looked up sharply. Midnight rain. Not rain from the sky. A route that arrived at midnight after running in bad weather service. A forgotten line connected to Connecticut. Connected to Cedar Hollow. Connected to the year Daniel died. She wanted us to think transit, not weather, he said. Marcus nodded slowly. And, not current transit. Archive transit. The driver took a left into the narrower lane beside the library annex, tires hissing over wet pavement. The building ahead was not grand like the main branch with its broad stone steps and carved lions. This one was quieter, lower, all service access and dark glass, a structure designed to keep paper safe rather than inspire tourists. A single exterior lamp burned above the staff entrance, turning the drizzle into floating silver threads. Nathaniel felt that old sensation return, the one from boardrooms before difficult votes and hospital corridors before bad news. Not fear exactly. Recognition. The knowledge that a door was waiting and whatever stood behind it would not let life return to its former shape. Marcus spoke into his cuff mic, low and quick. Two men in plain clothes were already inside at separate points, not tied visibly to Nathaniel. There only to watch exits and report movement. No uniforms. No show of force. Quiet, just as planned. If this is a trap, Marcus said, it is designed for patience, not speed. Nathaniel's eyes stayed on the building. Then we do not give it panic. They stepped out into the cold. The air smelled of wet stone, paper pulp, and the iron tang that city rain always pulled from grates and railings. Nathaniel buttoned his coat once, slid the folio beneath his arm, and followed Marcus to the service entrance. A woman in a gray cardigan and reading glasses was waiting just inside, thin, composed, perhaps 60, with the expression of someone who had long ago stopped being impressed by urgent men and expensive watches. She did not offer her hand. You are Mr. Price, she said. Eleanor called. Nathaniel nodded. And you are? Janine Holloway, Night Preservation Supervisor. She looked at the folio, then at him. If you are here for Box 111, you should know two things. First, it was not flood damaged. Second, someone already asked for it tonight. Marcus shifted half a step. Nathaniel did not. Who? Janine's mouth tightened. The request came through internal override, not a public slip. Name redacted. But the authorization code was old. Very old. Pre-digital. The kind only people from the old administrative structure still remember. Adrian, Nathaniel thought instantly. Or someone trained by him. Janine swiped them through a second door and led them down a narrow corridor where the air changed. From city damp to filtered archive cool. Shelving maps hung on the walls. Low lights hummed overhead. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became, until even their footsteps seemed to lower out of respect for the paper sleeping on every side. "We keep the reading annex below street level," Janine said. "Special transfers, damaged materials, municipal overflow, restricted records. Box 111 is in sublevel 3. Nathaniel followed, pulse steady, gaze alert, but inside him memory had started moving faster now. Daniel at 23, restless, idealistic, still naive enough to believe proof alone could save people. Marisol standing in a summer dress near the Cedar Hollow boathouse, saying, "You think the lie is in the money because money is what men like your father count. But sometimes the lie is in the names that disappear after the money moves." He had not understood then. Or worse, he had understood enough to feel threatened and called it practicality instead. They reached a steel door marked S3. Janine keyed in a code, paused, then frowned at the reader. "That is odd." Marcus stepped closer. "What?" She glanced up. The lock was disengaged from inside less than 4 minutes ago. No one spoke. The silence did not feel empty now. It felt occupied. Janine opened the door. Cool air drifted up from the stairwell carrying the dry, faintly sweet scent of old cardboard and preserved paper. Somewhere below, very softly, came the sound of a cart while turning once and stopping. Marcus moved first, not aggressively, just carefully, every sense sharpened. Nathaniel followed one step behind with the folio held close under his arm. The stairwell lights cast pale bars across concrete walls. On the landing between sublevels 2 and 3, Nathaniel saw it before anyone else did. A thin line of water trailing along the step edge. Not rainwater from their shoes. Too narrow. Too deliberate. Almost like a path. He crouched and touched it. Cool. Fresh. Janine looked confused. Marcus looked anything but. Nathaniel rubbed the moisture between thumb and forefinger and then saw the faintest silver shimmer on his skin under the fluorescent light. Not just water. Ink diluted by water. His gaze lifted slowly toward the lower darkness. Midnight rain, he realized, was not just a route or a code. It was a method. Water on paper. Ink run at midnight. Someone was trying to erase something before they got there. Marcus moved down the last flight first. One hand lifted slightly to signal silence. His footsteps measured against the concrete, as if even sound itself might damage whatever remained below. Nathaniel followed with the leather folio tucked tight beneath his arm, the scent of wet paper and cold metal rising stronger with each step, while Janine Holloway stayed just behind them, one hand gripping the rail, her professional composure now carrying a visible strain. Sublevel 3 opened into a long preservation room lined with rolling shelves, steel tables, document carts, and low fluorescent lights that washed everything in a pale, colorless glow. The room should have felt dead in the harmless way archives often did, full of sleeping records and stale air, but it did not. It felt interrupted. On the nearest table sat an open gray archive box marked 111 in faded black stencil. Beside it lay blotting cloths, a shallow stainless tray, and a portable humidity wand still humming softly on low power. Thin streams of diluted ink had dried in dark veins across the tabletop and dripped to the floor, where they mixed with water and spread into a bruised reflection under the lights. Nathaniel stopped dead. Midnight rain. Water on paper. Ink made to run before the truth could be read. Marcus crossed the room in 3 quiet strides and checked the far aisle, then the side service door, then the blind corner beyond the microfilm cabinets. Empty. No footsteps. No voices. No visible intruder. Just the aftermath of intent. Janine let out one sharp breath through her nose, horrified in the specific way only people who loved records could be horrified. They were washing the ink, she whispered. Not burning, not shredding. Washing. Nathaniel stepped toward the table. The open box held a stack of municipal transfer folders wrapped in preservation paper, some untouched, others dampened, and stuck at the edges where ink had begun to feather into useless blue shadows. But one file had been pulled free and left half unfolded beneath the blotting cloth, as if someone had been interrupted in the act of erasing it completely. Nathaniel recognized the old county seal first. New Canaan Municipal Record Office. August. 15 years ago. His fingers hovered over the page, then paused. Marisol's note came back to him again with startling force. Do not trust the first answer. He looked at the damage, the staging, the obvious panic of a rushed erasure, and understood the warning in a new way. Even now, even here, the first answer might still be the one someone wanted him to see. "Do not touch the top page yet," he said. Marcus looked over. "Why?" Nathaniel's gaze swept the table, the box, the tray, the wand, the calculated mess. "Because whoever did this wanted us to find it half-ruined. That means whatever is visible may still be arranged." Janine stared at him for a beat, then nodded slowly. "He is right." She crossed to a locked drawer and removed cotton gloves, clear spacers, and a narrow fiber optic light. Her hands steadied as procedure took over. If they targeted the ink, they were trying to destroy legibility without making it look like theft. That means the ordering matters. "We go layer by layer." Nathaniel put on the gloves she handed him and felt something cold and exact settle in his chest. Not anger. Something more disciplined than anger. The sort of clarity that arrives when remorse and purpose finally stop competing. He and Janine carefully lifted the top ruined sheet, with support cards beneath it. Most of the text had bled into blue ghosts, but a few lines near the lower edge survived where the water had not fully spread. Marcus angled the light. Janine read aloud, voice low and controlled. "Incident summary, private shoreline annex, unauthorized ledger transfer, witness statement attached under separate seal." She stopped. Her eyes moved to the right margin where a handwritten note in old black ink remained untouched because it had been written later in a different formula. Forwarded by instruction of A. Kessler. Marcus went very still. Nathaniel did not move at all. Adrian had touched the file. Not rumor. Not inference. Ink. "Keep going," Nathaniel said. The next page came apart more reluctantly, damp at one corner, stuck to the one beneath. Janine separated them with practiced patience. Halfway down the second sheet, a typed name survived in darker ribbon ink that water had not fully defeated. Daniel Price. Nathaniel's breath stopped so suddenly it felt almost visible in the cold archive air. The page identified him not as decedent, not as unrelated family reference, but as reporting party. Reporting party. Marcus looked up sharply. "Your brother filed something." Nathaniel stared at the words until the room seemed to lose depth. Daniel had not merely suspected. He had formally reported something. Something tied to the shoreline annex at Cedar Hollow. Something serious enough for county records, sealed statements, and Kessler's intervention. Janine turned the page with even greater care now. And there, protected oddly enough beneath an attached translucent map sleeve, was the thing no water had touched at all, a hand-drawn site diagram of Cedar Hollow. The main house, the dock, the boathouse, and marked in red pencil near the lower storage annex, a notation that made Nathaniel feel the floor subtly tilt beneath him. Transfer intake beneath rail service. B47 midnight drop. Marcus saw it at the same moment. The bus route. Nathaniel nodded once, barely. It had never been just transportation. B47 had been a covert transfer line, hidden inside municipal storm rerouting, moving materials between Connecticut and the city under the cover of infrastructure disruption. Midnight rain was a phrase for records moved during wet weather transit windows because fewer checks were made and damaged paper drew less suspicion. Janine lifted another sheet, and this time there was no surviving it without feeling its weight. It was a witness addendum, partly washed, partly intact, signed not by Daniel, but by Marisol Bennett. Her name sat at the bottom in the same precise hand Nathaniel remembered from conference notes and margin corrections, and above it one paragraph remained clear enough to read. Subject transfer includes financial ledgers, beneficiary names, and alternate custody file. Minor female child removed from primary registry and reassigned through private protection channel pending exposure risk. Nathaniel felt the blood drain from his face. He read the line twice, then a third time, because the mind rejected certain truths before the soul could catch up. Minor female child. Alternate custody file. Reassigned through private protection channel. Zora. Not just Marisol's daughter. Not simply a child hidden beside the truth. A child placed inside it. Marcus spoke first, very carefully. "Sir." Nathaniel lifted one gloved hand for silence, eyes still locked on the page. Below the paragraph, another name had survived in half-blurred letters. Mother of record, Marisol Bennett. Paternal line restricted by sealed corporate order. Nathaniel closed his eyes. Not in denial. In impact. 15 years of silence rearranged themselves in an instant. Daniel's obsession, Marisol's disappearance, Kessler's pressure, Cedar Hollow, the photo, the girl. It had not been random that Marisol trusted him before anyone else. It had been personal in a way he had not even imagined. Janine's voice dropped almost to a whisper. There is one more page. She lifted the final sheet from the bottom of the file. Unlike the others, it had been protected inside a wax-lined sleeve and escaped most of the water damage. A copy of a private memorandum, and signed but clearly internal, with a line item near the middle circled in red by Marisol herself. If Price Air inquiry reopens, remove Bennett woman and child before chain can be proven. Nathaniel stared at the sentence until every other sound in the room seemed to recede. Not because he doubted it, because for the first time that night, he did not. Marcus read it too, then looked at him with a gravity that had lost all pretense of being professional distance. They were never only covering up a file, he said. Nathaniel's gaze remained on the page, on the word child, on the shape of a secret powerful man had tried to dissolve in water and bureaucracy instead of fire, because water left plausible deniability. No, he said at last, voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the filtered air. They were covering up a bloodline. Nathaniel did not realize he was gripping the edge of the steel table until the cotton glove pulled tight across his knuckles, and Janine quietly set a stabilizing weight over the final memorandum to keep the damp paper from curling under the filtered air. The archive room had gone so still that even the low hum of the humidity wand sounded intrusive now, a mechanical whisper inside a truth too human to be processed cleanly. Marcus stood at Nathaniel's right shoulder without speaking, his face harder than before, not with anger, but with the kind of disciplined men where when they know one more wrong sentence could push a room past the point of usefulness. Janine remained on the other side of the table, eyes moving between the pages, and Nathaniel with the careful restraint of someone who had spent a lifetime preserving records without presuming ownership over the pain inside them. Bloodline. The word did not belong to headlines or boardrooms tonight. It belonged to a little girl in damp sneakers sitting under a blanket in an old townhouse, waiting for adults to come back with the truth instead of another polished lie. Nathaniel looked down again at the memorandum, at the phrase remove Bennett woman and child before chain can be proven, and a memory arrived with such brutal clarity that he had to close his eyes for one measured breath before trusting himself to speak. Cedar Hollow. Late August. The lake's surface flat as hammered glass. Daniel standing outside the boathouse, arguing with someone just beyond the open side door. Marisol crossing the grass with 2 folders in her arms and a look on her face Nathaniel had dismissed as agitation because dismissal had been easier than listening. He remembered Daniel turning when he saw him and saying, Nate, there is a child in this. Not a file. Not a number. A child. Nathaniel had answered with impatience. Told him not to dramatize a compliance issue before facts were verified. Told him there were procedures for allegations. Told him the board would handle it. Daniel had stared at him then with a look Nathaniel never fully understood until now. Not rage. Not disappointment either. Something worse. Recognition. As if his younger brother had seen the first outline of the man money might turn him into and hated how quickly the sketch was becoming permanent. Sir, Marcus said softly. Nathaniel opened his eyes. We need to secure copies of everything that remains legible and move before whoever started this realizes we got here in time. Nathaniel nodded once. The motion felt heavy, but precise. Digitize all surviving pages. 2 encrypted copies. 1 with Eleanor Pike. 1 offline with Janine under independent archive seal. Janine inclined her head. Done. Marcus reached for his phone. Nathaniel stopped him with a look. No calls through company systems. Marcus understood immediately. Burn line only. The next few minutes moved with quiet urgency. Janine photographed each page beneath a preservation lamp, capturing the surviving text before humidity or handling took any more of it. Marcus documented the room, the tray, the humidity wand, the diluted ink trails on the floor, every detail that turned sabotage into evidence. Nathaniel stood over the table and forced himself to read the surviving lines again, not because he wanted to, but because men like Adrian Kessler survived on the hope that horror alone would make decent people look away before they had memorized enough to fight back. Alternate custody file. Paternal line restricted. Price air inquiry. The structure of it became clearer with every rereading. Someone in the old network had discovered a child connected to the price line strongly enough to threaten inheritance, reputation, or control. Daniel had tried to report it. Marisol had tried to preserve it. Kessler had buried it under property transfers, storm route logistics, and sealed municipal records. And somewhere inside all of that, Zora Bennett had been hidden in plain sight not as an accident of circumstance, but as a life someone powerful had decided could be rearranged on paper. Nathaniel felt shame move through him then, not sharp, but total. Not because he had known every detail. He had not. But because the architecture of the lie was built from materials he had once trusted: hierarchy, procedure, reputation, delay. All the elegant tools powerful men used to make conscience look immature. Janine slipped the final page into a fresh sleeve and sealed it. "There is one more thing," she said. Nathaniel looked up. She pointed to the inside flap of the box lid, where dampness had loosened a layer of old adhesive. Beneath it, barely visible, was a narrow strip of folded onion skin paper someone had hidden in the cardboard seam years ago. Marcus carefully extracted it with a flat spatula and handed it to Nathaniel. The paper was fragile, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Marisol's. Just one sentence, written in the same neat blue ink that had guided them all night. "If he finally comes, tell him the girl has his brother's eyes." Nathaniel stared at the line until the filtered air felt too thin. Daniel's eyes. That warm, dark steadiness. The way Zora had looked up at him on the museum steps without flinching. The way she washed rooms like weather. The way she carried truth as if nobody had ever taught her to set it down. Marcus read over his shoulder and said nothing, which was kinder than any attempt at commentary could have been. Nathaniel folded the note once, then stopped himself and left it open, as if even a crease felt like disrespect. Daniel's child. The words never appeared in the file as plainly as that, but they no longer needed to. The chain had proven enough. Marisol had not only protected evidence. She had protected a girl from being erased by the sort of men who believed paperwork could outrank humanity. A sudden vibration broke. The silence. Marcus checked his phone and his face changed at once. "Mrs. Alvarez." Nathaniel took the call before Marcus could finish. The older woman's voice came through low and controlled, but not calm. "Mr. Price, she is gone." The room seemed to contract around the sentence. Nathaniel's hand tightened on the phone. "What do you mean gone?" "She was in the kitchen with me less than 2 minutes ago. She saw something through the back garden gate and said, 'That is my mother's bracelet.' By the time I reached the hall, the side door was open." Nathaniel shut his eyes for one hard second. Not in despair. In focus. Then he opened them again, and the man who looked back out through them was not the polished donor from the museum gala, not the patient strategist of boardrooms, not the son who learned too late what obedience to power costs. He was something more dangerous to the people who had built this lie. A man with proof, purpose, and a child to bring home. "Lock the house," he said. "No one in or out. We are coming now." He ended the call and looked at Marcus. No wasted words. No hesitation. Marcus already had his coat. Janine sealed the copies into archival sleeves and passed the folio back to Nathaniel. He took it and tucked Marisol's hidden note inside beside the photograph and the bus stub, every fragment now part of one living chain. As they turned toward the stairwell, Nathaniel glanced once more at the damaged file on the steel table, at the water-streaked ink and the words men had tried to drown before morning. Then he looked up into the fluorescent hush of the preservation room and spoke so quietly that only the paper, the shelves, and the 2 people beside him could hear. "They spent 15 years trying to bury one little girl," he said. "Now they are going to learn what happens when she is finally found."